you should only watch Chosen One videos from Obsidian.
Don't listen to that BS controversy.
Except for our videos, though. Our videos have special activation.
I don't care what your videos mean or what they are. They're not specialer than any of us, dude. They're not that special.
Idiot off.
They will take you to the ninth dimensional avatar state.
Shen-Yun. You have to see
You're wrong, and I will shut you down.
Mike,
Good.
Mike,
Go away.
gotta keep the psyop going, Mike. Come on.
Chosen One, you're not just playing the game, you're breaking it. Every move you make got a price tag now, and the ones who tried to ride your wave just realized this ain't a free ride. It's a high-stakes empire. You are the lifestyle, and it costs. It started with something so subtle that most people would have missed it entirely. A moment when you paused before automatically saying yes to yet another request. A split second where you questioned whether you actually wanted to attend that gathering or if you were just going to avoid disappointing someone. A quiet internal voice that whispered, "What about what I need?" before you launched into your usual pattern of putting everyone else first. These micro moments of self-awareness were like tiny seeds of transformation planted in the fertile ground of your growing discontent with how people treated you. You had spent years being the reliable one, the understanding one, the one who would drop everything to help others while your own dream sat gathering dust on the shelf. But something fundamental changed in how you carried yourself, how you made decisions, how you responded to people's endless demands on your energy. What started as subtle inner work, saying no to one more favor, questioning one more guilt trip, choosing yourself in one more small moment, had compounded into something undeniable. You had become someone who couldn't be manipulated, diminished, or taken for granted. The transformation wasn't dramatic or overnight. It was the accumulation of 1,000 small choices to value yourself, to trust your instincts, to stop explaining away other people's poor treatment of you. You began treating yourself like someone worthy of respect, and the universe started taking notes, and 3 distinct groups immediately took notice. The energy vampires, people who had built their entire relationship with you around your endless giving, your people-pleasing, your inability to say no. These were the friends who only called when they needed something, the family members who guilt-tripped you into compliance, the colleagues who took credit for your ideas while dismissing your input. They sensed their primary resource was being cut off and panic was setting in. You recognized them by their immediate shift in behavior, the moment you started setting boundaries. The friend who rarely texted suddenly became incredibly attentive when you stopped being available at their every whim. The family member who usually dismissed your opinions suddenly wanted to have deep conversations when you stopped seeking their approval. The colleague who never acknowledged your contributions suddenly started praising your work when you stopped working late to cover their mistakes. The opportunistic attachers, strategic players who smelled your rising success and wanted to position themselves as essential to your journey without doing any real work. These weren't the obvious energy drains. These were the smooth operators who had been watching from the sidelines, waiting for signs that you were becoming someone worth knowing. You spotted them by their sudden interest in your goals, their retroactive claims of always believing in you, and their eagerness to offer resources that had been available all along, but were never shared when you actually needed them. They moved with calculated precision, timing their approach for maximum impact, hoping to secure a position in your expanding world before you realized their true motivations. The strategic observers, a quieter group who had been watching your potential long before you recognized it yourself. Unlike the vampires and attachers, these people didn't seem threatened by your growth or desperate to attach themselves to it. They operated differently, offering support without strings, celebrating your wins without claiming credit, showing up consistently without fanfare. You almost missed this group at first because they weren't making noise. They weren't panicking like the vampires or campaigning like the attachers. They were simply there, steady and supportive, like they had been waiting for you to grow into someone who could recognize their value. But here's what made you different this time. You saw the game clearly. The energy vampires moved first, driven by desperation. Their entire operational system depended on your availability, your guilt, and your inability to maintain boundaries. When you started changing those dynamics, they launched their desperate three-phase attack, but you were ready. Phase 1 of their panic playbook involved suddenly showering you with attention and compliments. The colleague who never credited your ideas was now praising your incredible insights in meetings. The family member who dismissed your dreams was asking detailed questions about your goals with newfound enthusiasm. The friend who was always too busy was suddenly clearing their schedule whenever you were available. Your old self would have been confused and maybe even grateful for this unexpected validation, but your transformed self recognized the pattern immediately. You had developed what you called your authentic radar, an internal system that could detect genuine appreciation from strategic manipulation. Your response? You smiled, said thank you, and changed absolutely nothing about your boundaries. This was your first major victory. You learned to receive compliments without owing anything in return. You appreciated the attention without mistaking it for genuine connection. You enjoyed the moment without building future expectations around it or softening your standards because someone was being nice to you. When the colleague praised your insights, you acknowledged it gracefully and continued protecting your ideas from being stolen. When the family member showed interest in your dreams, you shared appropriately but didn't suddenly start seeking their approval again. When the friend made themselves available, you appreciated it without automatically becoming available in return. You had learned to separate appreciation from obligation, a skill that would serve you for the rest of your life. When love bombing failed to restore the old dynamic, the vampires escalated to phase 2, emotional manipulation. Every past favor became ammunition. Every time you had needed support became leverage. Your new boundaries were labeled unfair to people who were there for you during your difficult times. The guilt trips came from all directions. "After everything I've done for you" became their favorite opening line. They reminded you of every loan, every listening ear, every small kindness, reframing their past actions as investments that entitled them to unlimited future access to your energy. Chosen one. You didn't find this message by accident. You were summoned by the pulse of something ancient in your blood, by the frequency only the rarest of souls can hear. Welcome to the Obsidian Inner Order, where the ones who've been to hell and back don't just heal. Inside our sanctuary, we don't chase clout, followers, or fake peace. We shatter illusions. We wield prophecy. We initiate miracles. Each week our happy hour Zoom call isn't just a meeting. It's where revelations drop like lightning. It's where you laugh with soul family, cry with cosmic warriors, and walk away charged up. You're not just joining a group. You're stepping into a soul alliance, a league of misfits, prophets, warriors, and lightbringers who were never meant to fit in this world because we came here to reshape it. If you've been feeling like the system lied to you, if you've always known you were built for a different timeline, if your glow-up has enemies praying for your downfall, then it's time. This is your signal, the Obsidian Inner Order, powered by Astral Atom. We don't fit in, we take over. Link in the description. Your old self would have crumbled under the weight of this emotional manipulation, but your transformed self had developed something powerful, emotional intelligence that could separate guilt from genuine responsibility. Your response? You acknowledged their feelings without absorbing their emotions. "I understand you're disappointed" became your magic phrase. You validated their experience without changing your position. You showed empathy without sacrificing your standards. You cared about them without caretaking them. This was revolutionary for you. For years you had believed that loving someone meant absorbing their every emotion and sacrificing your needs to manage their feelings. Now you discovered that healthy love meant holding space for someone's experience without taking responsibility for fixing it. When they brought up past favors, you expressed genuine gratitude while maintaining that past kindness didn't create unlimited future obligations. When they called your boundaries unfair, you acknowledged their perspective while explaining that fairness meant honoring both people's needs. When they accused you of changing, you agreed completely. You had changed, and that change was intentional and positive. You were learning to be emotionally generous without being emotionally responsible for other people's reactions to your growth. Phase 3 was the vampire's nuclear option. When love and guilt both failed to restore their access to your energy, they switched to sabotage. Your motives were questioned, your transformation dismissed as temporary, stories spread about how you'd changed for the worse. They started campaigns to convince mutual friends that your new boundaries were actually signs of arrogance. They predicted your success would be short-lived because you were burning bridges. They painted your self-respect as selfishness and your standards as impossible expectations. Your old self would have been devastated by this character assassination. You would have spent countless hours defending yourself, explaining your position, trying to control other people's opinions of you. Your transformed self had built something they couldn't touch, an unshakable foundation of self-knowledge. Your response? You let your results speak louder than their rumors. Instead of engaging in defensive arguments, you focused on your goals. Instead of trying to control the narrative, you continued living your values. Instead of explaining your choices to people who were determined to misunderstand them, you invested that energy in building your future. This was perhaps your greatest breakthrough. You realized their panic was actually confirmation of your power. The more desperately they tried to pull you back, the clearer it became that you had something worth protecting. Their sabotage attempts were actually testimonials to the effectiveness of your transformation. You began to see their resistance as feedback. When someone criticized your boundaries, you knew those boundaries were working. When someone called you selfish for prioritizing your goals, you knew you were finally valuing yourself appropriately. When someone predicted your failure, you knew you were threatening their comfort zone in ways that validated your growth. While you were managing the vampire's desperate tactics, the opportunistic attackers were executing their own sophisticated strategy. Unlike the panicking vampires, these were calculated players who had been studying your transformation and timing their approach for maximum impact. But you had developed something they hadn't counted on: discernment. Your journey had taught you to recognize the difference between genuine support and strategic positioning. You had learned to feel the energy behind people's actions, not just the actions themselves. You could sense when someone was invested in your success versus when they were invested in their association with your success. The attacher's first prong involved retroactive claims of support. Suddenly, everyone had always believed in you and seen your potential from the beginning. Old conversations were referenced out of context, past interactions were reframed through rose-colored glasses, and previous indifference was reconstructed as quiet encouragement. Your old self might have been grateful for this revised history, especially during moments when you doubted your own worth. But your transformed self had developed something precious, the ability to trust your own experience over other people's convenient revisions. Your response? You smiled and kept detailed mental notes. You remembered exactly how you'd been treated before your transformation. You knew the difference between revised history and actual support. You could recall the specific moments when these same people had dismissed your ideas, ignored your potential, or treated you as unremarkable. This wasn't about holding grudges, it was about maintaining clarity. When someone claimed they had always known you were special, you remembered the years when they treated you as invisible. When they referenced past conversations as evidence of their early support, you recalled how those same conversations had actually made you feel small and unheard. You appreciated their current enthusiasm without forgetting their past indifference. You welcomed their newfound respect without rewriting history to accommodate their narrative. You stayed gracious without becoming gullible. The attacher's second prong involved suddenly offering resources, connections and opportunities that had been accessible all along but were never shared when you actually needed them. These offers were positioned as investments in mutual success rather than desperate attempts to secure placement in your expanding circle. Your old self would have been overwhelmed with gratitude for these long-awaited offers, but your transformed self had learned to evaluate every opportunity through a new lens: reciprocity and timing. Your response: you considered every offer with strategic intelligence. You asked yourself crucial questions. Would this have been offered when I needed it most? You evaluated. Is this genuine partnership or strategic positioning? You analyzed. Does this align with my values or just my ambitions? When the colleague who had hoarded connections suddenly offered introductions, you appreciated the gesture while noting the timing. When the friend who had been financially stingy suddenly wanted to invest in your projects, you considered their motives alongside their money. When the mentor who had been too busy to help suddenly had time for extensive guidance, you welcomed the support while maintaining healthy skepticism about the motivation. You were learning to receive opportunities with gratitude while maintaining your standards for how you wanted to be treated. You could accept help without accepting poor treatment. You could collaborate without compromising your values. The attacher's third prong was the most sophisticated, elaborate visions of what you could accomplish together. They presented detailed plans for collaboration, positioned themselves as essential to your next level of success, and painted pictures of mutual triumph that sounded incredibly appealing. Your old self would have been seduced by these grand visions, especially coming from people who seemed to understand your potential better than you did. But your transformed self had developed something invaluable: clarity about your own vision and values. Your response? You tested their commitment to your actual goals, not just your potential success. You paid attention to whether they supported your vision or tried to reshape it around their capabilities. You noticed whether they wanted to elevate you or elevate themselves through you. You observed whether their partnership proposals enhanced your mission or served their agenda. When they pitched elaborate collaborations, you evaluated whether those collaborations aligned with your authentic goals or just sounded impressive. When they positioned themselves as essential to your success, you considered whether their skills were truly necessary or if they were creating artificial dependency. When they painted pictures of shared triumph, you analyzed whether that triumph would honor your values or compromise them. The breakthrough moment, you realized that anyone truly meant to be part of your journey wouldn't need to campaign so hard for the position. The right people would naturally align with your path without demanding guaranteed placement or trying to convince you of their indispensability. While managing the vampire's desperation and the attacher's campaigns, you began noticing a third group operating entirely differently. These people weren't panicking or campaigning, they were simply showing up consistently. At first, you almost overlooked them because they weren't making any noise. They weren't demanding attention like the vampires or pitching partnerships like the attachers. They were just there, steady and supportive, operating with a quiet confidence that intrigued you. They offered value without demanding reciprocity. They supported your growth without trying to direct it. They celebrated your wins without claiming credit. Your response? You leaned in with curious appreciation. You started paying attention to the people who had been quietly supportive all along. The friend who consistently checked in without needing anything in return. The colleague who shared opportunities without expecting favors. The mentor who offered guidance without trying to control your decisions. You noticed who had been celebrating your small wins before they became big victories, who had offered help during your struggling periods without making you feel like a burden, who had believed in your potential without trying to manage your journey. And then you made a crucial decision. You began mirroring their energy. Instead of just receiving their support, you started offering the same quality of connection in return. You began supporting others' growth without trying to control it. You celebrated wins without needing recognition. You offered value without keeping score. This was a completely different way of operating than what you had learned from the vampires and attachers. Instead of transactional relationships based on need or strategy, you were experiencing reciprocal relationships based on mutual respect and authentic care. The breakthrough moment. You realized these weren't just supportive people, they were operating at the same frequency you had worked so hard to achieve. They had already mastered the lessons you were learning. They were living examples of what you were becoming. With clarity about all three groups, you developed an elegant strategy that worked on multiple levels. Instead of trying to manage each group separately, you created a unified approach that honored your values while effectively sorting your relationships. You practiced radical authenticity. This became your North Star. Instead of trying to manage everyone's reactions to your growth, you simply continued growing. You made decisions based on your values, not other people's comfort levels. You spoke your truth, not what people wanted to hear. When vampires tried to guilt you into old patterns, you stayed authentic to your new boundaries. When attachers tried to seduce you with strategic opportunities, you remained authentic to your actual goals. When observers offered support, you responded with authentic appreciation. Radical authenticity meant stopping the exhausting work of being different versions of yourself for different people. It meant integrating all parts of your personality into one consistent, genuine expression. It meant trusting that the right people would appreciate the real you while the wrong people would filter themselves out. You implemented effortless boundaries. Your old approach to boundaries had been defensive and exhausting. You would set a limit, then spend enormous energy defending it, explaining it, and maintaining it against constant pressure. Your new approach was revolutionary. You made your boundaries non-negotiable. Instead of arguing about your standards, you simply maintained them. Instead of explaining your choices, you just made them. Instead of defending your limits, you quietly enforced them. When vampires tested your boundaries, you didn't engage in long debates about why those boundaries existed. You simply restated them calmly and followed through consistently. When attachers tried to negotiate around your standards, you didn't provide detailed justifications. You maintained your position with quiet confidence. This effortless approach worked because it came from internal certainty rather than external validation. You weren't setting boundaries to prove a point or punish anyone. You were setting boundaries because they aligned with your values and supported your well-being. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of your strategy was redirecting your energy from relationships that diminished you toward connections that inspired mutual elevation. You stopped pouring effort into proving your worth to people who were determined not to see it. You redirected that energy toward building relationships with people who already recognized your value. You chose quality over quantity in every area of your life. This meant some relationships naturally faded as you stopped doing all the work to maintain them. It meant saying no to social obligations that drained your energy without providing meaningful connection. It meant prioritizing your goals and the people who supported them over social expectations and people who demanded your energy without reciprocating. This was perhaps the most difficult but most important part of your strategy. You let your authentic frequency do the work of attracting aligned people and repelling incompatible ones. Instead of trying to convince people to treat you better, you simply required better treatment and let people respond according to their capacity. Instead of explaining why you deserved respect, you carried yourself with dignity and let people show you who they were through their actions. You allowed natural consequences to teach the lessons you used to try to explain. You watched relationships reorganize themselves around your new energy without trying to control the process. This required enormous trust in your own worth, trust in the process of growth, and trust that the universe would provide the relationships you needed as you became the person you were meant to be. Each group sorted itself according to its true nature, and you were able to witness the power of authentic living in real time. Some vampires, faced with your consistent boundaries and refusal to return to old patterns, realized they needed to develop their own internal resources. These were the ones capable of growth who had simply been taking the easy path of draining others instead of doing their own work. You watched with amazement as certain friends began taking responsibility for their own emotional regulation instead of expecting you to manage their feelings. Family members started respecting your time and energy instead of assuming unlimited access. Colleagues began pulling their own weight instead of relying on your over-functioning. These transformations were beautiful to witness because they proved that some people were willing to do the work to maintain connection with you. They valued the relationship enough to evolve their approach when their old methods stopped working. Others found new people to drain and gradually faded from your reality. These were the ones who were more committed to their dysfunction than to genuine relationship. Rather than evolving their approach, they simply found new victims who hadn't learned to set boundaries yet. A few escalated their desperate tactics until they exposed their true nature to everyone watching. These were the ones who couldn't accept that their manipulation no longer worked and became increasingly extreme in their attempts to restore the old dynamic. Their behavior became so obviously toxic that even people who had previously enabled them began to see the truth. The opportunistic attachers revealed their true commitment. The attachers' responses were equally telling. Some decided that the work required for genuine partnership was worth the investment and began their own authenticity journey. These were the people who had perhaps been operating strategically out of insecurity rather than malice. You watched as certain colleagues stopped trying to position themselves advantageously and started collaborating genuinely. Professional contacts began offering real value instead of empty networking. Social climbers started building authentic relationships instead of collecting strategic connections. These transformations were gratifying because they proved that some people were willing to abandon manipulative tactics in favor of genuine connection when the manipulation stopped working. Others realized they preferred easier targets and redirected their efforts elsewhere. These were the people who were more committed to the strategy than the relationship. When they discovered that connecting with you required authenticity and effort, they decided to invest their energy in people who were still susceptible to surface-level charm. The persistent ones burned out trying to fake a frequency they hadn't earned. These were perhaps the most determined attachers who refused to accept that their strategic approach wasn't working. They exhausted themselves trying to maintain fake alignment with your energy, eventually giving up when the effort became unsustainable. As the vampires and attachers sorted themselves out of your reality, the observers became more visible and active in your life. They began sharing resources that matched your new level of operation. They offered genuine collaboration based on mutual respect and complementary strengths. Most importantly, they welcomed you into a network of people operating at your frequency. This was perhaps the greatest gift of your transformation, discovering that there were others who had already learned to live authentically and who could support your continued growth. These relationships felt different from anything you had experienced before. There was no manipulation, no scorekeeping, no strategic positioning. There was simply mutual respect, genuine care, and shared commitment to growth and authenticity. Every relationship in your life now reflects your actual worth. Every opportunity aligns with your genuine goals. Every interaction honors your real values. This wasn't achieved through aggression or manipulation. It was the natural result of consistently honoring yourself and requiring others to do the same. Your career transformed as you stopped accepting roles that underutilized your talents and started pursuing opportunities that matched your capabilities. Your social life evolved as you stopped maintaining relationships out of obligation and started investing in connections that inspired mutual growth. Your family dynamics shifted as you stopped managing everyone else's emotions and started taking responsibility only for your own well-being. Your romantic relationships deepened as you stopped accepting less than you deserved and started attracting partners who could match your level of emotional maturity. High-caliber people seek you out because they recognize authentic power. There's something about the way you carry yourself now, confident without being arrogant, boundaried without being rigid, generous without being depleted, that attracts others operating at your frequency. Meaningful opportunities flow toward you because you've proven you won't undervalue yourself. When people know you have standards, they approach you with better offers. When they know you won't accept poor treatment, they show up with their best behavior. Genuine connections form easily because you've mastered the art of showing up as yourself. There's no performance, no strategic positioning, no exhausting effort to be what others want you to be. You simply show up authentically, and the right people recognize and appreciate what they see. Perhaps the most rewarding aspect of your transformation is how it impacts others. Your example gives people permission to raise their own standards. Your boundaries teach them how healthy relationships function. Your success proves that authenticity doesn't limit opportunities, it attracts better ones. You notice friends starting to implement their own boundaries after watching how well yours work. Colleagues begin standing up for themselves after seeing how you handle workplace dynamics. Family members start taking responsibility for their own emotions after experiencing your refusal to manage them. You've become living proof that it's possible to honor yourself without destroying relationships, to have standards without being unreasonable, to be authentic without being selfish. You realized the game was never about proving your worth to people determined not to see it. This was the insight that changed everything. For years you had been playing a rigged game, trying to earn recognition from people who were invested in keeping you small. You had been seeking validation from sources that were fundamentally unable or unwilling to provide it. The game was about recognizing your own value and living from that truth regardless of who could or couldn't handle it. The game was about creating a life that reflects your internal transformation rather than shrinking yourself to fit other people's limitations. You learned that the three groups were actually your teachers. Energy vampires taught you that some people will never value what they can access for free, so you learned to value yourself first. They showed you the importance of boundaries and the power of saying no. They demonstrated how your unlimited giving was actually enabling their dysfunction. Opportunistic attachers taught you that not everyone who wants success is willing to do the work, so you learned to discern between genuine and strategic approaches. They showed you how to recognize authentic partnership versus manipulative positioning. They taught you to trust your instincts about people's motivations. Strategic observers taught you that when you operate at your true frequency, the universe provides aligned support, so you learn to trust the process of authentic living. They showed you what healthy relationships look like. They proved that quality people exist and will show up when you're ready for them. The people who found it expensive to be around you weren't paying for your arrogance, they were paying for their own resistance to growth. This realization freed you from any remaining guilt about your transformation. When people complained that you had become high maintenance or too much work, you understood that they were actually revealing their own unwillingness to evolve. Your standards weren't unreasonable, they were just higher than what these people were willing to meet. Your expectations weren't impossible, they were just inconsistent with how these people wanted to operate. You weren't pricing people out with your demands, you were filtering for people capable of matching your authenticity. Now you understand, your frequency is your superpower. The more authentically you operate, the more powerfully it works. The sorting never stops, it just becomes more sophisticated. As you continue evolving, new groups will emerge, but now you have the wisdom to handle each with grace and strategic intelligence. You're no longer playing defense against people who want to diminish you. You're playing offense, creating a reality that matches your inner transformation. Your journey continues as an expansion rather than a struggle. Each new level brings new challenges, but also new capabilities. You attract people and opportunities that match your growing capacity. You handle conflicts with increasing skill and grace. Most importantly, you've learned to trust the process. You know that living authentically will always sort your relationships appropriately. You understand that honoring your values will always attract the right opportunities. You believe that being genuinely yourself will always connect you with the right people, and that's how you won the game, not by beating other people, but by becoming so authentically yourself that only authentic people can stay in your orbit. You are killing the game because you finally learned the most important rule. The game was always about becoming who you really are. The three groups served their purpose perfectly. They taught you everything you needed to know about boundaries, discernment, and authentic power. They helped you develop skills you didn't know you needed. They prepared you for the level of success and relationship quality you're now experiencing. And now, as you continue growing into your full potential, you carry these lessons with you, not as wounds from past battles, but as wisdom for creating an extraordinary future.